Good evening, everyone. We want to thank you all so much for coming out this evening. This is for our Voter ID seminar. We have with us tonight from the State Board of Elections, Ted Fitzgerald. He's the Chief Learning Officer. He's going to be taking you all through the presentation. We have a lot of people in the house I want to recognize this evening. First, we have Hugh Moore. He is one of our board members. We have Karen Marisite, our Deputy Director. And we have Amber Morton, one of our administrative assistants. She's going to be helping out with a lot of photo ID. So we're just excited you all are here. If you have any questions, if you would wait until after the presentation, and we'll try to address them best we can. If we are not sure, we don't know, we'll be happy to get back with you on any of that as well after the presentation. So, Ted?
Thank you, Parker. Well, thank you. It's nice to see such a good turnout. I'm so glad to see that you are all here and are interested in elections. I do want to recognize and thank Parker and his board for putting this together. You are all very fortunate to have such a diligent director and staff and board as you've got here in Lee County. And Karen, it's nice to see you too. It's been a while. This is a voter information seminar. We're here just to give you some basic information about voter ID for 2020, just so you can be ready for it. And so you can take this information into the community and help us get this information out into the people who need this information. This is not designed to be a thorough review of all the rules of voter ID. It's not comprehensive. We could not possibly cover all that in an hour. This is just really a high level look at it. As we go through the presentation, I'm sure you're going to have questions. If you would just jot them down on your paper or just keep them in the back of your mind, and at the end of the presentation, we're going to answer questions. We have to wait until the end to take questions because there's just too many people here to stop and do it as we go along. We'd be here way past an hour to do that. And I promise you, at the end of this, I'll stay and answer every single one of your questions, even if it takes till 10 o'clock tonight. So I promise that we'll do that. So going ahead and getting started, we're going to talk tonight about the new voter ID laws.
Has that been activated?
Oh, okay.
That's
Yeah.
all I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is a camera in the back and it's recording. It's for a local news group organization. So if you don't want to be on camera, don't turn around or don't get in front of it. And just wanted to let you know that is there. And we'll be recording what is said in here, which is fine. This is all public information, certainly. We're going to talk about voter ID, but we're going to also cover some things that we get a lot of questions about, and I know Parker and his board members do too, such as provisional ballots, voter registration, and residency. So we will talk about that in addition to voter ID, but the first thing that I really want to say to you is that it's very important that we get this information out, that voter ID is not required for any election in 2019. So for these upcoming municipals, voter ID will not be required. Now, I know that all of y'all know that, but you'd be surprised how many calls we get asking about that. So that is something that we do need your help in getting that out into the community. So when is it going to be required? 2020 primary, which starts in March. We have a presidential primary next year, so our primary is moved up to March. All voters are going to be asked to show photo identification when presenting to vote in person. In addition to that, voters will be asked to include a copy of their photo ID when voting absentee by mail. And we'll go into more detail about all of this in just a minute. Take a look at this. Do you recognize any of these? Do you have any of these cards with you or in your possession? This is the sampling of the cards that are going to be acceptable for photo ID in 2020. And we'll go over the major cards here. First of all, most of us are familiar with the North Carolina issue ID cards from the DMV, either the driver's license or the non-operator ID. Now, these cards can be expired, but no more than 1 year. So if you've got a driver's license and it recently expired and it's election time, that's okay. You can still use it to vote. Just it cannot be expired more than 1 year. Also, the passport and the passport card are acceptable. Same expiration restriction, cannot be expired by more than 1 year. Military, do we have any active or retired military here? Yes, sir. Military or veteran ID cards have no expiration limits. It includes active, retired military, their dependents and their spouses, as well as the VA benefit card. The Cherokee are a federally recognized tribe in North Carolina. All federally recognized tribal ID cards are acceptable, and these cards have no expiration limits on them. North Carolina also has tribes that are state recognized. These cards have to be approved by the State Board of Elections, and we are in the approval process right now through November 1st, 2019. If you'd like to follow that approval process, we keep a list on our website that you can refer to. These cards also have no expiration limits. Approved student ID card from a state or private university or community college. We are in the process of approving applications right now, and the approval deadline has been extended to November 1st, 2019. Same thing for employee ID cards from a state or local government agency, such as the Lee County firefighters, police, county government, city government, public or charter schools, or private public universities, excuse me. And also, these do have to be approved by the Board of Elections, and we are in that process right now to November 1st. For people who have just moved into North Carolina, what about them who moved in from another state? They can use their driver's license or non-operator ID card issued by another state, the District of Columbia, or a territory or commonwealth of the United States, but only if the voter's registration was within 90 days of the election. So if they moved in within 90 days of the election, they can use their out-of-state card. If they've been in the state longer than that, and they register outside of 90 days of the election, they'll need to use another form of identification. Usually by that time, people get a North Carolina ID. We talked about the expiration dates of 1 year for most of these cards, and that is correct. What about people over 65? There is an exception. If the voter is over age 65, they can use an expired form of any of those cards that we talked about, as long as the ID was not expired on the voter's 65th birthday. Now, what if someone does not have any of these cards? We have a new voter identification card. Parker's going to hand out a couple samples so you can take a look at this. If you do not have one of the other forms of identification, you can get one of these. They're free of charge, and they're provided by the County Board of Elections. Now, if you've got any of the other forms of ID that we talked about, you don't need one of these cards. You're certainly welcome to go get one if you want one, but you don't have to have one of these cards to vote if you've got any of the other acceptable forms of ID, such as a driver's license. Now, getting one of these is a pretty straightforward and simple procedure. The registered voter will go to their County Board of Elections office and provide their name, their date of birth, and the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. The County Board of Elections will verify their information, and they will go ahead and make that card right then and there at that visit for them and issue that to them. If for some reason there is anything that any questions about that or they can't verify the information, they'll go ahead and take their picture at that time, and then the board will research that and then they'll produce their card and mail it to them. It may take a couple of days, but they'll go ahead and get it to them. And these cards are valid for 10 years. And just because the card expires doesn't mean the voter becomes inactive. Now, these cards will be made by the County Board of Elections anytime except for a brief period between the last day of early voting and Election Day. So anytime that the county board office is open, someone can come in and get one of these cards. And if someone loses it, they'll replace it, no charge. And if someone's appearance changes or their name changes, of course, they can request a new card.
Oh, that's good to know in case I have some
In
plastic.
case you get married.
No, I'm thinking if I had some plastic surgery, I
So how does this affect Election Day? Early voting and Election Day, how does this affect when you go to the polls? What's going to happen? So the voter is going to present the voting site. The precinct official will ask the voter to state their current name and resident address. The voter will state their current name and resident address and present an acceptable photo ID. After examination, the precinct official will determine that the voter is duly registered and the voter will receive a ballot, a regular ballot. What about curbside voting? So very similar to that. Curbside voting, by the way, is available for persons who are unable because of age or disability to enter a poll site without aid. They can vote from their cars. And it's available at all voting sites, early voting and on the day of election. So the voter at curbside would state their name, their address. They take the affirmation oath with the election official that they are eligible to vote curbside, and then produce a photo ID. Now, we mentioned earlier absentee by mail. A voter must attach a form of acceptable identification when voting absentee by mail. Now, we understand that that's going to be difficult for some people. If a voter is unable to do that, he or she may sign an affidavit declaring that something prevented them from enclosing a copy of their photo ID, or that they did not have access to a method to attach a copy of their ID. Now, that something is what we call a reasonable impediment, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. And just by the way, our men and women serving us overseas, they're not affected by our voter ID requirements. They have their own special way to vote, and it's not affected by our requirements. So before we get to reasonable impediments, let's talk about voting without an ID. So the question is, can someone vote without a photo ID? The answer, of course, is yes, they can. All voters are going to be allowed to vote with or without an acceptable form of ID. No one is going to be turned away from the polls or told they cannot vote. Now, when voting in person, you'll be asked to present an acceptable form of ID card. If you don't have one, you've got several choices. One of which is you can go to your County Board of Elections now and get one of those cards. Now, if you don't have time to do that, you can vote provisionally. And that provisional ballot is going to count if you either bring an acceptable photo ID to your County Board of Elections office before canvass, or if you sign an affidavit declaring that a reasonable impediment prevented you from showing photo ID. Now, canvass is that 10-day period immediately following Election Day. The election is not official at 7:30 at night on Election Day. There's a period of 10 days when the Board of Elections is very busy doing a lot of work. And during that 10-day period of canvass, you can bring your photo ID to the Board of Elections office, and that provisional is going to count. Or you can declare that a reasonable impediment prevented you from showing your ID, and we're going to go over those in just a minute. But I want to talk for a minute about provisionals, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about provisionals. For example, the partner on this board don't like to count them, or they just want to count them if the election's close. We hear all kinds of things. None of that is true. All provisionals are examined by the board. And provisionals are used, they're the fail-safe. Not everyone who goes to vote has a smooth experience, okay? Sometimes there are questions about a voter's qualifications. You're not registered to vote, or it says here that you've already voted. Or voters' eligibility to vote in a given election. We see here you're not registered in this county, you're registered in Harnett County. Or their eligibility to vote a specific ballot style, such as in the primary. If you'd like to choose a ballot from another party, but that you're registered in one party, you would have to vote provisional. And now provisionals are going to be used when there are questions about photo ID. So if a voter does not present an acceptable form of ID, a provisional ballot is going to be offered to that voter. And that ballot is going to be counted when the voter brings an acceptable form of ID no later than the end of business on the last day before canvass. That's a mouthful to say. Or qualifies for a reasonable impediment. What's the difference? Well, let's say any one of us on election day, or early voting, we stood in line for, how long are your lines? 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
Say the max about 15.
Well, mine are like an hour or two, okay, in my county. So let's say I stood in line for an hour and I get up there to vote and I reach in my back pocket and realize I've left my wallet at home. Well, I don't have a photo ID. Okay, so that means that I can either go get it, which means I have to come back, or I can vote provisionally. Now, for my provisional to count, because I have an ID but I left it at home, I would need to bring my ID to the County Board of Elections office during that canvass period. When I do that, my provisional is going to be counted. It's going to count at that point. Now, what about people who don't have a photo ID? They can qualify for what we call a reasonable impediment. Now, there are reasons that people don't have an ID or are unable to get one. Okay? And those reasons are what we call reasonable impediments. They are basically, it's the inability to get a photo ID due to any number of reasons, such as lack of transportation, disability or illness, lack of documents, work schedule, or family responsibilities. Any of those could be reasonable impediments as to why someone might not have a photo ID with them. There are some more. This could happen to you and me. What if you lose your wallet or your purse is stolen the day before the election? You don't have a photo ID to vote, do you? Well, you will be allowed to vote a provisional ballot. And because it is a reasonable impediment, a lost or stolen photo ID, your vote is going to count at that time because it's a reasonable impediment. You don't have to bring your ID back to the Board of Elections and show them because you lost it or it was stolen. If it qualifies for a reasonable impediment, it's going to be counted. Just a couple other reasons. Some people go to the DMV and get an ID. It takes them about a week to get it in the mail. They don't issue them immediately like they used to. And then there's going to be a blank line that says other. Any other reasonable impediment that somebody would list that's not already listed, the ones I just went through are going to be listed on a form that somebody can choose one of those. But if they have another reason that is a reasonable impediment, they can go ahead and write that down. Now, it will be the County Board of Elections' job to determine that that is a reasonable impediment. And if it is a reasonable impediment, that vote is going to go ahead and count. People often ask, what is not a reasonable impediment? Well, something nonsensical, for example, would not be a reasonable impediment. It's very straightforward. Now, these are exceptions to presenting a photo ID. If someone has a religious objection to being photographed, there aren't many, but some do. They have an exception for presenting a photo ID, and they would make that declaration. Same thing with the natural disaster. If someone is affected by a natural disaster occurring in the county within 100 days of the election, and it has to be a natural disaster that's declared by the governor or the president, such as one of those hurricanes that come through once every couple of years and flood us out, right? That would be an example of a natural disaster. If you're a victim of that, or that has prevented you from having a photo ID, you can declare that, and you'll be able to vote provisionally, and that provisional is going to count. But no one's going to be turned away or told they cannot vote because they do not have a photo ID. Those provisionals offer every voter the opportunity to vote. We'll shift a little bit over to voter registration. These questions come up a lot. Ma'am, you came in late, and we're going to take questions at the end, if you don't mind. Thank you. So, voter registration. So how do you register to vote? Well, in North Carolina, you have to meet the legal qualifications to vote, first of all. And then you need to complete a voter registration application. So there's really 2 steps to that. So what are the qualifications to vote? Basically, you have to be a citizen of the United States, either born or naturalized. You have to live in the county of your registration and have resided there at least 30 days prior to the date of the election. This means somebody just driving down US 1 can't stop here on election day and vote in your county. Have to be at least 18 years old and not serving a sentence for a felony conviction, including probation and parole. If someone is convicted of a felony in North Carolina, they lose their right to vote. However, once they have completed the terms of their sentence, which might include probation, parole, restitution, their citizenship rights are restored, and they can register to vote as a citizen. Now, 17-year-olds, and this is important for next year, 17-year-olds can vote, can register to vote and vote in the primary if they're going to be 18 by the general election. So if you know of any, let them know that so that they can vote in the primary. And future voters can pre-register to vote up to 2 years before their 18th birthday. So 16 to 17-year-olds can register to vote and pre-register. And so once they turn 18, they're already in the system and they're ready to go. To register to vote, you need to use a voter registration form. We have some in the back that you can pick up if you'd like. Now, you can also download it off of our website or the county board's website. But you do have to download it, fill it out, sign it, and return it to the County Board of Elections. Don't let somebody tell you over the phone that they're going to register you to vote over the phone, or by an app, or by email. Okay, it's not true. And unfortunately, sometimes those things happen, don't they? So. But you can get these voter registration forms and turn them in at the State Board of Elections or the County Board of Elections. You can also get these forms at your public library. They have them here. Or public high schools and universities offer voter registration services. Now, voter registration drives. How many participate in voter registration drives? That's a lot of fun, isn't it? Going out there and registering people to vote. Anybody can do a voter registration drive. You don't need a license or a special permit or anything like that. But there are some rules that you need to follow. And you do need to use the state-issued voter registration forms. So if you are going to do that, I recommend that you contact the County Board of Elections, and they'll be happy to go over those rules with you and provide you with the forms. Well, that's not the only place that we do voter registration. These services are also located and offered at services where you receive state or federal services, such as the DMV. Department of Social Services offers these services. Public health. Disability service agencies such as vocational rehabilitation offer voter registration, as does Employment Security Commission. And if you're going to vote on election day, you need to register 25 days before each election, before the election. That's for voting on election day. Now, if you miss that deadline, does that mean you can't vote? No. We have what? Same-day registration in North Carolina. We've got 17 days of early voting, which means you can register to vote and vote during that period at the same time, same day. So how do you do that? Well, you complete voter registration and proof residency by providing any of the following. And it's important to know that people who register to vote during early voting do have to prove residence in the county. Now, they can do that by presenting a North Carolina license with current name and address, or one of the other North Carolina ID cards, or one of the other photo IDs issued by a government agency with their current name and address. By current address, we mean the one in the county where they're registering. Now, they don't have to necessarily use a photo ID. They can use other forms of acceptable documents that include a current utility bill or bank statement, government paycheck, or other government documents with the voter's name and address in the county. Any of those are acceptable for proving residence in the county during early voting. And also now, we also include current college photo ID cards as long as they have proof of campus habitation. And I just wanted to add that not every state offers early voting. And that some states offer early voting, but you have to have an excuse, or you have to have a reason to vote early, such as you're going to be out in the country, or you're going to have surgery. North Carolina has, you need no excuse to vote early. Anyone can do it. And 17 days, some states offer for 5 days, some 10 days, some 20 days. So it just varies state to state. It's important that you keep your registration updated, especially if you change your name or if you move. So how do you do that? Well, you use the voter registration form that we mentioned to change your name, change your address, or change your party. And you can change your party any time except during the primary. So if you want to change your party so you can vote for a party in the primary, you need to do it before early voting starts in the primary. We mentioned our military and overseas voters, and I just wanted to go back to that for a minute and just let you know that they have several options. They can request a mail-in absentee ballot just the same way that you or I do, and they can vote by that method. Or they could register and vote through special programs for military and overseas voters that are really a lot easier for them to register and vote. Now, we can't take advantage of these. It's only for our military and overseas citizens. But they do that through the Federal Voter Assistance Program. And if you want to know more about it, this website is where you go to learn more about how they can vote. But again, we just want you to know that our men and women serving us overseas do vote in our elections and they do participate. And their voting is not impacted by our photo ID requirements. The last part is on residency. So what address do people use when they register to vote? The law says you need to use your permanent address, and that's defined as the place where you live, the place that you plan to return to when you're absent. So you leave in the morning to go to work, you come home to this place at night. When you go on vacation, you come back to this place when you return from vacation. That's what it means when you're absent. So if somebody temporarily relocates, we mentioned the hurricane, so a number of people had to move out of their county and relocate to other counties, or they moved in with family members in other counties. If they did that, could they still vote in their county, at their residence? Yes, they could. Yes, you can. If a voter relocates temporarily with the intent of returning, they will maintain their permanent residence in that county. Now, what if someone moves to another county and establishes a permanent address there? Can they still come back and vote in this county? Even if their cousin is running for something? No, they can't. So a voter who moves to a new permanent address loses residency based on that previous address. So they need to register and vote in that new county. Persons experiencing homelessness. So if a person's residence is not associated with real property, then the location of their usual sleeping area is how we define residence. And that we broadly construe that definition to provide all persons with the opportunity to register to vote. Now, one way we do that is the voter registration form has a map on it where someone can indicate on this map where they are sleeping in reference to maybe cross streets or a landmark. And then the Board of Elections uses something that they call geocode to identify that place and place them in the proper precinct or voting district. We get a lot of questions about college students. College students leaving home, going off to college to make their way in the world. Where do they vote? So college students can register and vote in the county where they attend college, if they intend to make the college community their home. Now, they don't have to necessarily intend to stay there after graduation to do that. But a good example of that would be someone who's going off to college and they're saying goodbye to their parents and they're saying, I'm going to college and I'm not coming back here. Okay? Just send a check. They can decide that that college community is going to be their home. Or a number of students, they go off to college, but they don't really cut the apron strings. And they consider home to be home during that time. And so they would register or remain registered at that home address. And they could either vote absentee, or when they go home to do laundry, they could vote if it's during early voting or on election day. So they have options. But the important thing is that students who register at school understand that that registration cancels their previous registration in another county. And that's important. Once they graduate and move back to where they're going to be or to another place, that they understand that they need to register after they move away from college. But the important thing is that everyone understand that you can only vote in one place, that there is a penalty for voting in multiple states or multiple times during the election. It's a Class I felony for double voting. So back to voter ID. What are we doing to let the public know about this? we're doing a number of mailers to all the households in the state about this. There's going to be a total of 4 that go out. Media outlets, of course, media is giving us a lot of attention. At the polls, when people go to vote at the polls in the municipals, there'll be information available there and posted, and precinct officials are going to be trained to answer questions, as well as next year they'll be trained to offer assistance. If you want to do some local outreach to an organization here in Lee County or your church, we have this presentation on giving. This is online, and you can certainly download it and use it yourself and give it to any group that you want to. Or if you want someone from the county to come do that, I'm sure Parker would be happy to do that. And if he's too busy or can't do it, I'll come down and do it, or someone from my office. So we're happy to help doing local outreach with this. Number of educational resources and voter notification. We are running a list of people who are registered to vote, but are not registered with the DMV. And that will give us a list of people that might not have driver's licenses. Now, they might have another form of ID, but what we're going to do is reach out to them individually and just let them know that they are, that we see that they're registered to vote, but may not have an ID card. And that list is also available to the public, if you'd like a copy of that. So lastly, just wanted to ask you or remind you, how many of you are election officials or have been? Thank you for your service. It's hard work, but it's rewarding work too. And all counties need election officials. So it's a great way to get involved and be of service, and you get to work with great people, and you even get paid a little bit. Student election assistants, this is great for people who are 17-year-olds, high school. Now, not every 17-year-old can do this. You have to meet certain qualifications to do this, but if you know a 17-year-old who's civic-minded who might want to do this, let them know about it. It's a great opportunity. They get trained as an election official. They receive the exact same training that election officials receive. And they get to do the exact same job that election officials do. They're not just given some little job over in the corner. They do the same work. And they're paid the same as election officials. So it's a great way for someone who's 17 who's civic-minded to really get involved. And lastly, as mentioned, the multi-partisan assistance teams. If you're recruiting for those, there are a number of people who are in nursing homes who have no one to help them, no family whatsoever, and they may need assistance registering to vote or requesting an absentee ballot or voting an absentee ballot. Well, multi-partisan assistance teams are people from each party who are trained by the County Board of Elections and certified by them and allowed to go into these nursing facilities at their request. And they are able to assist voters in requesting absentee ballots and filling out the absentee ballot. And it's a great way to be of service. It's highly rewarding. So I recommend highly that you try that. We mentioned earlier that we have materials available if you want to take this presentation. For example, the State Board of Elections website, and we have handouts here at the back that have all this on there, phone numbers and the website address. But if you want to know more about the voter ID, we have this big banner that says voter ID on it. If you click that, it takes you to our special voter ID page, where we have a number of resources, such as this presentation. We also have downloads, such as the flyers that you have back there. You can download those yourself. And also, if you're so inclined, you can read the laws behind this. The constitutional amendment is there. The court decisions are there also if you want to read about that. You know, this is in the courts right now and can change at any time. But until it does, the court says we go forward with this information, as well as the draft rules that we are working on for how this is going to be implemented in the process at the polls. So there's a lot of good information there. And lastly, before I close, I just wanted to say that we hear a lot about interference in our elections from people from other countries and even people in our own country. And we want you to know that we take the security and integrity of our elections very seriously. It's our #1 priority. And we have done a number of things over the last couple of years to address this. We have a whole page here of some excellent information on what we're doing about election security. If you're so inclined, you can go take a look at that. Also, there's information here about voter fraud. North Carolina Board of Elections investigates charges of voter fraud. And then once we investigate it, if we think there's merit for prosecution, we refer it to the district attorneys. It's the district attorney that prosecutes voter fraud, not the State Board of Elections. We just investigate it. So all that information is there. At this time, it's time to open it up for questions. Lady in the back had a question earlier, so.
My question was pertaining to provisional ballots. You used the example that you forgot your ID, and then you gotta go back and bring it. Then you use the example of somebody that's sick, and they fill out a provisional ballot, but they ain't gotta come back. When I come back, how you gonna know it's me? And how you come on get the same ballot, so it can be counted?
Okay, so provisional ballots, when you vote a provisional ballot, you fill out certain information there at the election, at the poll site. And that goes on an envelope. And then your ballot goes inside that envelope, which is sealed at that time. And you sign it saying that you saw it sealed. That envelope is numbered, and you are given that number along with written instructions of exactly what you need to do, if anything, for that provisional. So if you have to go back and bring your ID, you would give them your name and address, and they would find that provisional along with that number that you have that you were given on that piece of paper, and they would find that provisional envelope, and they would take the provisional envelope, and you would confirm that it's still sealed. And then they would just verify on the front of that envelope that you brought your ID back, and that the provisional will be counted.
Okay, two questions on provisional. So if I'm a printer and I go up and I figure out a way to get my ballot in, when do you count it?
Provisionals are counted on the last day of the election. The county board meets at 11 o'clock in the morning on the last day of canvass, and they review the provisionals and they determine which ones are going to be counted. Now,
So I just want to make sure I understand. So if, my dad, who doesn't hear well, comes in and does his, and the person that he's talking to that's taking the information down for him, the worker person, and then that person works a mess, or it's raining outside like it was last time, and it's a hot mess when you turn it in, would he be accepted or not?
let's talk afterwards. I didn't really understand all of that, and I don't want to misspeak, so we'll talk after that about.
It's okay, if you guys answer it, maybe I'd be on your, but my whole concern is your provision.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Got two questions. Number one, if someone has to change an address and they also need a voter ID card, at the time that they apply for their voter ID card, they can also use the form to change their address at the same time. Is that correct? Instead of having complete another voter registration form. So that will serve that purpose. Excellent, okay. Now on provisional ballots, if someone uses a provisional ballot during early voting, anytime before the election day, they can go to the Board of Elections and produce their identification, and that particular ballot, does it become validated then, or does it have to wait until that, right after elections?
It is a provisional, so it has to wait and go through the provisional process. But what you said is worth repeating. So someone who does not have an ID or loses it, for example, and votes early, they can go to the County Board of Elections after the last day of voting, because they don't produce the cards there between the last day of early voting and election day. So they can get it before then or after then. And they can get the card made. At that point, they have the ID that they need, but they've already voted provisionally. Okay? So their provisional is going to be counted because they now have ID. And then in the next election, they've got their ID. They've got what they need.
Okay, so in essence, if they do early vote, anytime before election day, they can go to the Board of Elections, either get a voter ID form or provide identification, and that in effect will validate their ballot, so that when you do finally count it on the last day of the election, it's a done deal.
Yes. Except for what I said about they don't produce those cards between the end of early voting and election day. Okay, yes, ma'am.
You mentioned some forms of identification that might not necessarily have the current address on them. Like, for instance, you said you take a driver's license from out of state if they had just arrived. That wouldn't necessarily have their correct address on it. Would they need something with their correct address on it, like a utility bill or something?
Yeah. So her question is a little bit technical. This is for people, in this example, someone is registering to vote during early voting, and they are using an out-of-state ID card. Now, they can use the out-of-state ID card because they're registering within 90 days of the election for voter ID. But because they're